Hello, my name is Dr. Jackalyn with DTP-Leadership Group, and I want to talk to you today about no kings, no silence, the American resistance to Trump's militarized rule. I think I'm going to give you some wonderful topics and wonderful things and references so that you can really understand what's going on and join everyone making an effort to fight against Trump's agenda. This is Hot Topic, Bold Talk. Now, I want to introduce this podcast by saying what I think we have not realized at all is that the chaos that Trump creates in our world is a way to distract us from fighting the power he's exhibiting, like he did with the military parade. The chaos comes, so we'll ignore the very things that we need to be paying attention to. And I think, unfortunately, we need to be responding to Trump's actions. So we need to do that. But at the same time, we have to focus on the things we're most concerned about. And I'm most concerned about this, quote, big, beautiful bill that our senators need to hear from us about, saying we are not interested in that bill being passed. And we need to educate everyone about the harmful actions that are described in the bill, because there's so many things that would harm all groups of Americans. Trump is the only president that I have ever seen that refuses to respect the Constitution of the United States. It is very clear that he thinks the executive branch of government should run the entire country, ignoring the legislative and judicial branch. These branches are there for a reason. They provide balance and are a protection for Americans. We are seeing we are not protected from him. And I do believe that the judicial system is trying to do everything in the world, but the legislative system is being dominated by the mega Republicans. Now, the bill is something we must look at. We must call our senators and really express our disdain for it. Now, in this podcast, yes, I'm going to cover a number of the things about the invasion of LA that could have been easily resolved by the mayor of LA, Karen Bass, and the governor of California, Gavin Newsom. Of course, it would not be acceptable to Trump, since he could not show Gavin Newsom that he can do anything he wants. And besides, Gavin is a thorn in his side. Newsom is not going to stop talking, and he's going to confront Trump in the news and in the courts. Also, Trump thinks he has to show us he will rid us of as many immigrants as he can. Trump has demonized immigrants and has built them into a major hate group. Now, let's talk about the LA invasion, targeting immigrants and political rivals. That's what was going on. I feel appalled at the number of countries he has banned in his travel bans and its executive orders. His ICE will do this job and deport people since they have a daily quota from him. They're not deporting people who are criminals. They're deporting your and my friends who have contributed to our community, work and pay taxes like any of us. Trump wants to use the immigrants and the resistance to the ICE raids in LA as a way to see if he could put down peaceful protests, since he is testing all kinds of actions before the 2026 elections. So don't be a fool. He is working every way in the world to see what he can get away with, because I think he's going to make every effort to control what happens in the 2026 elections. So we need to keep marching. He knows he's in trouble. The protests are a statement that millions of people in America do not support what he's doing. He learned that protests nationwide took many Americans away from his glorious parade that he was having. We need to understand the cost of Trump's parade, and I'll give you that information later in this podcast. The cost for invading LA with military troops was $134 million. Is that what you want our money to be spent on? I believe there are definite dangers from manufacturing the chaos that he does. It's exhausting. It gets us unfocused, and it allows him to create an overwhelm of chaos that prevents us from focusing and doing what we need to do. The march has proved we can do what we need to do. Now, Trump's actions become even more dangerous when he decides to support his border czar, who's saying that the California governor, Gavin Newsom, should be arrested, which is not for a crime, but opposing Trump with his unusual seizure of Gavin's state National Guard. The National Guard is supposed to be controlled and managed by a governor of a state. Now, let's look at this too. Weaponizing the military, a dangerous constitutional breach. And I want to go to many of the things about the invasion of LA by Trump. It has been 60 years since a president needed to send troops into a state. I was in college during that time in history of the 1960s. So I will tell you about the difference in the actions of President John F. Kennedy sending troops to Alabama to override the governor of Alabama, and he sent troops to desegregate the University of Alabama in 1963. He knew that he had to do this in order to protect the civil rights leaders who were fighting segregation. Now, that's Trump sent in troops to LA to prove that he could do it. And his actions only increased conflict in LA. Now, through my lawyer friends, I've gotten clarity that Trump invoked a rarely used provision of the U.S. Code on Armed Services that allows for the federal deployment of National Guard if there's a rebellion or a danger of rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States. That is not what happened in LA. There is no such rebellion underway. Americans are angry about the deportations and know that they are not justified. One of Trump's many executive orders that are not a part of, and remember, these executive orders are not a part of law. They're simply a memo that goes to the executive branch. But he has assumed that to the extent that protests or acts of violence directly inhibit the execution of law, they constitute a form of rebellion against the authority of the United States. Yet, the closest action I personally have seen in our country that could have been defined as a rebellion was when Trump's own supporters, whom he incited and then mostly pardoned, sacked the U.S. Capitol in 2021. The reality is past presidents have seldom deployed troops inside the United States. They worry about using the military domestically and become the legal foundation doing so are obviously unclear. My lawyer friends say there is a lot of vagueness about the legal foundation for doing things like this. If presidents have hesitated using the military to assist in recovery after natural disasters, but feel free to send in soldiers after a few cars are set on fire, the law is alarmingly vague. This is a quote from the New York Times on June 8th. And as you know, you always get my references at the end of my podcast. Now let's talk about the manufactured rebellions and the legal smokescreens that Trump used. When Trump decided to send the U.S. military into LA, this is also terribly questioned, not just the taking over the National Guard. And I think the Public Citizen, which is an organization that has a large number of lawyers that have won significant cases in the courts against Trump, they talk about in their newsletter what's happening in Los Angeles right now. And they present a clear picture by this statement. Now Trump is deploying the U.S. military against American citizens on our own soil for the crime of exercising our First Amendment right to speak up against tyranny. This is what authoritarianism looks like. Trump's actions were against the wishes of Karen Bass, the mayor of LA, and California's governor, Gavin Newsom. Newsom accurately called what Trump did as purposeful inflammatory actions and a serious breach of state sovereignty. It's interesting also to see what a more conservative and an investigative group do with this particular incident. Epoch Times has in their newsletter, as protests against President Donald Trump's immigration policies flared across Los Angeles over the weekend, questions have arisen about whether he would or could invoke the another law or another act that was in 1807 and send active duty military to quell the rioting, quote, and the vandalism. The Epoch Times gives some of the history related to this act, the Insurrection Act of 1807, and a few things they've said I think you would be interested in. These are the times that our presidents have done something about sending troops into a state. President George Washington called upon state militias to suppress the Whiskey Rebellion, which was an uprising against federal excise tax on liquor. Abraham Lincoln used it on the onset of Civil War and used U.S. grant against the Ku Klux Klan. George Bush used it when 4 police officers were acquitted after beating Rodney King to death. In 2020, with the death of George Floyd, Trump declined to use the law. Isn't it interesting? He wouldn't do it in 2020 to defend a person who had been killed by the police, but now he's going to do it just to prove that he can do it. Now, the No King Day protest and the Citizens March is amazing. I want to begin this section with something from Forbes magazine. Walmart heiress challenges Trump. When President Donald Trump was inaugurated, a slate of billionaires stood behind him. Now a small group of the country's richest and wealthiest are standing against him. Walmart heiress Christy Walton, one of America's richest women, worth an estimated $19.4 billion, paid for a full-page ad in the New York Times, calling on readers to mobilize on Saturday, the same day Trump is scheduled to host a military birthday parade in Washington, D.C. The words "No Kings" appeared at the top of Walton's ad, and an apparent reference to a political organization of the name that is organized a nationwide demonstration this weekend. Of course, Trump warned if anyone interfered with his deployment of the National Guard and Marines, or if anyone protested his parade, they would be met with very big force. Well, as we go along in the story of the marches, we're going to get even more information. Another woman that is truly standing up and who I greatly appreciate is my Congresswoman, Lizzie Fletcher. And she always gives us things on a Friday about the Washington week wrap-up. Here's what she had to say. Sending U.S. troops into American cities. On Saturday, President Bush federalized the California National Guard and announced that he would send National Guard troops and U.S. Marines to the Los Angeles. This is not normal. And according to her, the local and state officials did not need it. They didn't need his help. Neither the mayor nor the governor asked the troops to deal with protests. In a small area of downtown Los Angeles, a federal court ruled Thursday that Trump violated federal law and the U.S. Constitution, exceeding the scope of his statutory authority and violating the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution. Lizzie is a lawyer. The court explained the federal and state governments and sets a dangerous precedent for future domestic military activity. Trump appealed the decision, and an appeals court temporarily blocked the judge's order, allowing the National Guard to remain under federal control while the appeals court considered the case. A hearing is to happen today, which is Tuesday, June 17th, 2025. So in Washington, she says the events were also viewed in the context of the military parade that the president has requested taking place on his birthday tomorrow, which is the 250th birthday of the U.S. Army, a day to celebrate and honor the extraordinary men and women who have served our country to serve, secure, protect, and preserve our country and our freedom for 250 years. Across Washington and across the country, many, including me, this is Lizzie Fletcher, are concerned about the optics of tanks on the streets of the national capital, something we are more used to seeing in places like North Korea or Russia, and the message it sends about the state of our democracy in America. So let's look at this. Authoritarianism on display, the parade, and then let's look at the protests. The parade is expected and did cost between 25 million and 45 million at the same time that the administration is cutting benefits and services for active duty military families and for veterans. Let me repeat that. Here's this $25 to $45 million parade when the administration is cutting benefits and services for active duty military families and for veterans. The president's speech this week at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, criticizing the free press and political opponents, disregarding longstanding norms and undermining the Army's nonpartisan service, gives rise to further concerns about the state of our democracy. These words and actions are those of autocrats and authoritarians, the very opposite of the first president of the United States, George Washington, the first commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, and the kind of leader Washington warned us against. And he warned us against someone like Trump. Now let's look at the economic fallout for small businesses and deportations. It's interesting that Trump decides last week that he's not going to mess with the farmers and with small business organizations. And then this week, he's decided he's going to continue invading restaurants and farms to find immigrants that need to be deported. I want us to look at something that I think is terribly important that was in ink in their newsletter. They call it what the LA protests mean for small businesses and the economy. They go on to say an expert on American labor history lays what needs to happen to avoid a recession as the government pushes for mass deportation. Here are the comments from this article. The protests against ICE raids targeting undocumented workers are about more than workers and immigration rights. They're a fight to keep the U.S. out of recession. Paul Orst, professor of labor history of Cornell's School of Industrial and Labor Relations, says only pressure from small businesses and labor unions can stop this kind of thing happening. Now, we know a massive protest can also have a tremendous impact. Cities across the nation are joining Los Angeles to protest that the president of the Service Employees International Union, California, a workers' union with a heavy immigration membership, was arrested Friday during a demonstration, triggering further protests. Now, he was released on bond, but there's still issues he's going to have to deal with. The movement against the raids has garnered support from a surprising source. I think this is fascinating because there are Republicans in Florida that are, and all over the country, that, and you can see them in my script, all of the ones that are saying, we've been diehard Trump supporters, how we are now speaking out against Trump's administrative actions for mass deportation. Why did they change their tune? Labor unions remind us that small businesses rely on immigrant labor. And Ernst has thoughts on how this will play out and what small businesses should do to protect the economy. So it's an excellent article. It goes back to the fact that many small businesses throughout the entire run of American history have been led by immigrants. But political parties historically have stirred up anti-immigrant rhetoric to get votes, which is what Trump did. But from the perspective of small business owners, whether they're Hispanic, whether they're in San Francisco or Los Angeles or St. Louis or New York City, the question that they had for the federal government is, who's going to do the work? Who's going to keep the doors open of small businesses? Now, another thing we need to realize, veterans are speaking out. They see his actions as a betrayal of their service. This article is really about veterans that condemn Trump's misuse of the military. And I think it's important to see that it gives a clear picture of what veterans think about Trump and his actions. This ending about the parade article is important to hear. I think if you asked, and the author says, I think if you asked those families what they need at this moment, it wouldn't be a parade. It would be, I need a job or I need childcare. Jameson argues, who is this parade really for? Because it doesn't feel like it's for the service members of the family. And in the other article by the veterans condemning the use of the military, here's a strong point that is made. President Donald Trump has prompted conflicting feelings among veterans, some of whom strongly disagree with his decision to bypass Governor Gavin Newsom and deploy the National Guard and Marines to quell Los Angeles immigration-related protest against federal raids in this city. A longtime strong voter base for Trump, some veterans, as much as Newsom, voiced their grievance regarding Trump's use of the military on this occasion. These concerns come amidst protests over recent cuts to the Department of Veteran Affairs and several of its programs, including one that provides mortgage assistance. So here's Trump having a parade for his birthday, and yet his administration is cutting Veteran Affairs and several of its programs, money that could help, along with cutting mortgage assistance. There's another thing that we need to look at: the Marines' dilemma: serving democracy or serving Trump. Now, I have another article that I think is outstanding in the Washington Post. The president's deployment of Marines to Los Angeles is not only unnecessary and illegal, it is also unfair to the Marines themselves. As a former captain who commanded infantry at 29 Palms, where these Marines are stationed, I empathize with their dilemma. The sergeant and corporals have to adopt tactics against what their training is when they go into LA. The lieutenants and captains have to wrestle with the lawfulness of this executive order. And the spirit of the Marines must be suffering as they ask themselves on this convoy from inland California to the coast, is this what I enlisted for? That's an infantry unit, not military police, not logistics, and not communication. Their tactics are geared to locating, close with, and destroy the People's Liberation Army or the Islam Revolutionary Guard, not Los Angeles people. Now let's talk about the Million March: No Kings, No Tyrants. Paul Krugman has an excellent thing in Substack. He talks about joining the No Kings Day protest in New York. He says the protest was huge despite the rain. The poll analyst, G. Elliott Morris, has worked with a number of independent journalists to produce rough estimates of how many people participated in the protests nationwide and came up with a number between 4 and 6 million. That's a huge number. Meanwhile, Donald Trump got the military parade he wanted for his birthday, and it was a box office bust, probably attracting far fewer than 250,000, the White House claimed. In fact, the ops were simply embarrassing. As the Washington Post noted, some of the crowd filed out as the parade continued, the number of onlookers thinning before the president made his remarks. Even benches seating for VP guests positioned directly across from a riser for the news cameras remained half empty throughout the program. So what we saw on Saturday was more than just a juxtaposition of poorly attended parade that was supposed to glorify the leader against massive enthusiastic protesters. And they end this article with this statement. We also saw a body blow to Trump's image of invisibility and a demonstration that millions of Americans are willing to stand up for our democracy. Now, we all have the right to dissent. It is a constitutional stand we can take. And I want to end this section with comments from the American Constitutional Society. This organization is a diverse group of progressive lawyers, law students, judges, scholars, advocates, and many others that support and advocate for laws and legal systems. They redress the founding failures of our Constitution, strengthen our democratic legitimacy, uphold the rule of law, and realize the promise of equality for all people, which includes people of color, women, LGBTQ plus people, people with disabilities, and others historically excluded communities. In this article by the ACS, the American Constitutional Society, entitled A Statement, Military Response to Los Angeles Protests. And this is what they have to say. After a week of mostly peaceful gatherings in Los Angeles protesting increased U.S. immigration and customs enforcement raids in Southern California, and the administration's immigration enforcement policies, the federal response suggests that its priorities are to stifle dissent and score political points rather than maintain public safety. So all you people that are worried about public safety, that's not what you're getting. Unfortunately, we as a nation already know the danger of invoking the military in responses to largely peaceful civilian protests. From protests against the Vietnam War of Kent State in 1970 to the protests in support of the Black Lives at Lafayette Square in 2020. The misuse of our military to stifle public protests only to sow chaos and provide a pretense to undermine civil liberties and constitutional rights is what's happening. The right to protest is embodied in the First Amendment. It is a protection of speech and assembly. It is the foundation to the health and the viability of the multiracial, pluralistic democracy. ACS supports the rights of all who choose to express their dissent through peaceful protest and encourages all protesters to know their rights. Now, I want to end this podcast in this way. We must face the truth. Donald Trump is no longer pretending to lead within the bounds of democracy. He is actively dismantling it by turning the military against American citizens, defying court rulings, silencing dissent, and glorifying himself with tanks and pageantry. He reveals exactly who he is, a man hungry for control, not committed to service. But he's not the only one with power. We, the people, have our voices, our protests, and our votes. The courage of millions who march on No King's Day, the outcry from veterans, the resistance from governors, and the pushback from small business leaders shows us that Trump may control the military, but he doesn't control our conscience. We are not pawns in his parade. We are patriots. And at this moment, our silence would be complicit. Let us continue to speak, march, organize, and defend the promise of this nation. because democracy doesn't defend itself. We must do that. I appreciate you listening. I hope you will make a contribution to Patreon, and I want to thank you for continuing to pay attention to what I'm saying.